We lead a unique life. I think most other professions are involved in people going to offices and industrial buildings and warehouses or whatever, but we're out here dealing with nature, and farming is a unique life, which of course you see in the Bible. I mean, Adam and Eve were to take care of the Garden of Eden, and we're out here taking care of our, quote, gardens. And so I always think about that we have the most natural occupation and the most necessary occupation on the face of the earth, and so we love what we're doing. Well, hi, I'm David Brown, the owner with my wife Nancy of Mustard Seed Farms in St. Paul, Oregon. On the day we're taping this, the thought just occurred to me this morning that I actually started farming 50 years ago last month. And so I was farming while I was still living in Edwards Hall at George Fox College. And if the minutes are still around, Howard Macy even had a motion later in that year to send a letter to my sheep to tell him to let David get done with the sheep so he can get back to student council meeting by 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Anyway, one of my memories. But anyway, and started a little store at our farm in Newberg, where the hospital is now, and called it the Mustard Seed, and eventually changed it to Mustard Seed Farms, with the idea that, in faith, believing that God would bless it and make it grow, and He certainly has. And so we started with just a few acres then, and we're up to 82 acres now the last several years of organic produce.
Mark and I moved back in 2006 and planted a little garden, and it's just been growing ever since. So we started Fern Creek as a CSA in 2010. We choose it every year because it's good work. And it fills our summer and means we don't have much flexibility, but we just get all kinds of satisfaction from the families that affirm what we're doing for them, the interns that feel like their lives are just being broadened in ways they never would have imagined. We're just making our little ripple in the big scheme of things, but that it's good work. I'm Lisa McMinn. Long time, I'd like to say I'm fourth generation Oregonian. College professor was, nurse was, farmer and writer now. So I started off as nursing and really went into it because I wanted to be a midwife, wanted to help women have their babies. Mark was in academia, and I thought that was the life. So I loved going back to school. I've loved the teaching chapter, and in some ways I feel like all of it has had these components that are nourishing people in different ways, or caring for people in different ways, or growing them in different ways, whether it was nursing or teaching or feeding them. And then I wanted to, for my sabbatical project, I wanted to study the local food movement, and said, why don't we, Mark is always game, he's great. I said, why don't we do a small CSA? So for 3 years we expanded, and we've capped it at 25 families. Half of them come on Monday and pick up a crate of food, and half of them come on Thursday.
But sometimes people might complain and say, hey, you know, this head of cauliflower or this lettuce or whatever doesn't look that great. And my standard answer to that is, you know, this stuff isn't cranked out in a machine shop, you know. It's out here in nature, and we deal with the weather and the conditions that God sends our way, and so we live with it.
It's so hard to express without sounding kind of woo-woo. But I feel like I have the sense that God's sustenance really is in the green bean. It really is in the tomato. God spoke the world into being, and God is in everything, and God's sustaining me through the green bean. You know, there's just this connection that is not just metaphysical, it's really literal. And that amazes me, and I just feel a different kind of awe about the food I eat, knowing this is God's sustenance here. God spoke this into being and is speaking it into being still.
I don't know how many times a year, but more than once, several times a year, I just think about the fact that our livelihood depends on all these little seeds germinating. And God's creation of seeds and making things reproduce is just kind of amazing. We had one crop this year of a new variety. We tried purple broccoli, which is a minor crop, and the old variety we had wasn't available, so we tried something new. It turned out terrible. In fact, I met with the seed company people the other day and he said, yeah, it is pretty irregular. Well, now you tell me. But anyway.
One year in Tennessee's more forgiving maybe. I think I was very pregnant. I think it was the nesting instinct. And I said, we have to get our garden in, and we planted the whole thing in one day in March. And the seeds that could forgive us our folly did and sprouted, and the ones that didn't I just thought were bad seeds, rather than that it might have been user error. So some, like peas, like get cold and plant them early and they'll do well. Cucumbers and squash want warm soil. So it's kind of knowing, and actually if we were paying attention to the natural world, we'd see this. When are peas blooming, and when are cucumbers, when do they come? So it's paying attention, and thank God that our ancestors did all that work for us. I don't need to figure that out. You know, some seeds prefer to go directly into the soil, like beets. Tomatoes wouldn't do well here. We don't have enough heat. So you need to put seedlings in the ground. And seedlings require a kind of, well, they have to decide that they're going to take root to live. And that's so interesting. I mean, it almost feels like a cognitive decision they make, or they don't. And if they don't take root quickly, they will not make it, and they'll wither and die. And to take root, they need the ground not to be too wet. They need not to be hit with too much hot sun once you've put them in the ground. We harden them off first to get them used to being outside. Seedlings are kind of like raising children, you know. And you want them to take root, and that's kind of they're not going to be okay until they've taken root. And once they do, they're going to be fine.
But I think germination probably is the most uneasy time, and hoping that the crop comes up. We have a small crop of onions this year because the germination in the flats on the onions last spring was not as good as it should be. It's always not as high a germ as some other things, but some of it just wasn't that good. And I've talked to the seed companies and I've learned some things, so even after all these years I still learn.
Part of working in any capacity with God, and we talk about this at NFC a lot, it's paying attention. Where do we see God at work, and then how can we join that work? And feeling like I'm getting to join it in this most fundamental, often overlooked as being spiritually significant at all way, is really brings me a lot of deep joy.
What is the joy in it? Well, I'm a numbers and an organizational person, so I guess, you know, as far as the season goes, number one is the planning and so on. We talk to our customers and find out what they want, and then I just go through the planning process, and I have a 5 or 6 page seed order sheet with, I don't know, 150 to 175 different varieties of crops on it. Then I have spreadsheets for the seeding plan in the greenhouse, and like we grow 126 flats of lettuce on a planting, and so that's planned out, and the dates of how to plant it. So all the organizational part, I mean, I just enjoy that because of my nature, I guess. And then on the harvest end, to be able to sell this and to have your customers just say, Dave, that is just so beautiful, it tastes so good.
It's really good food. This morning I had an omelet that had an egg from one of our hens and some chanterelle mushrooms that, thank you Carl and Jenny Berkey for those. They brought some by. Some of the last broccoli and one of our heirloom onions, and it's so good.
We love what we're doing.